A collapse rarely announces itself with a single catastrophic moment. It begins quietly, with small system failures that cascade faster than human response time can compensate. Power grids destabilize, fuel logistics stall, communication networks degrade, and within hours, what once felt permanent becomes unreliable. The danger is not just the event itself, it is the false confidence people carry into it. Most assume they will have time to react, time to gather supplies, time to think clearly. That assumption is the first and most critical failure point. When a grid down or SHTF scenario unfolds, hesitation becomes exposure, and exposure becomes vulnerability.
The idea of a bug out is widely misunderstood. Many interpret it as a simple evacuation. Grab a bag, leave the city, head towards safety. But evacuation science and emergency management research show that unplanned movement during infrastructure failure dramatically increases mortality risk. Traffic congestion alone has repeatedly proven lethal in crisis scenarios, where highways become static choke points and fuel availability collapses within hours. The flaw is not in the concept of leaving, it is in the timing, the planning, and the understanding of system behavior under stress. Movement without intelligence is not escape, it is displacement into uncertainty.
One of the most dangerous misconceptions is that mobility equals safety. In reality, movement consumes resources at an accelerated rate: calories, water, energy, and decision-making capacity. The human body under stress dehydrates faster, burns glucose inefficiently, and experiences cognitive decline within hours of sustained uncertainty. Studies from disaster evacuations consistently show that individuals who leave without pre-calculated routes, supply redundancy, and environmental awareness are more likely to encounter secondary hazards such as exposure, dehydration, or conflict zones. The hidden science here lies in metabolic demand and logistical friction, two variables rarely considered by untrained individuals.
Water, often treated as a simple packing item, becomes a central failure point during a bug-out. The average human requires a minimum of 2 to 3 liters per day under moderate conditions, but that requirement can double in high-stress or high-temperature environments. Carrying sufficient water for even 3 days becomes physically burdensome, which forces reliance on resupply. This is where most plans collapse. Natural water sources are not inherently safe. Microbial contamination, including bacteria, protozoa, and viruses, can render untreated water a direct threat. Boiling, filtration, and chemical purification each have limitations, and without proper understanding, individuals risk trading dehydration for infection. The critical oversight is not the lack of tools, it is the lack of applied knowledge under pressure.
Another overlooked variable is time compression. In controlled environments, people make decisions with access to information, rest, and stability. In a collapse scenario, decision cycles shorten dramatically. The brain shifts into survival mode, prioritizing immediate threats over long-term planning. This leads to impulsive actions, choosing familiar routes over optimal ones, overpacking unnecessary items while neglecting essentials, or delaying departure until conditions deteriorate beyond safe thresholds. Cognitive science identifies this as stress-induced narrowing of perception, where individuals focus on a limited set of cues and ignore broader environmental signals. This is why pre-planned protocols are not optional. They are the only defense against degraded decision-making. Fuel is another silent constraint that transforms mobility into a liability. Modern transportation systems are built on just-in-time delivery models, meaning fuel stations operate with minimal reserves. In a widespread disruption, these reserves are depleted rapidly, often within hours. Vehicles then become stationary assets, trapping occupants in exposed environments. The misconception is that having a vehicle guarantees range and speed. The reality is that without secured fuel access and alternate mobility plans, vehicles become anchors rather than escape tools. Historical data from evacuation failures consistently shows abandoned vehicles lining major routes, creating physical barriers that further slow movement and increase exposure time.
Communication breakdown compounds every other risk. When networks fail, individuals lose access to real-time information, coordination, and emergency services. This creates an information vacuum where rumors and assumptions replace verified data.
The inability to communicate also isolates individuals, removing the possibility of coordinated movement or mutual aid. The hidden principle here is that survival is rarely an individual event, it is a networked process. Without communication, that network collapses, and each person operates with incomplete situational awareness. This increases the probability of entering hazardous zones or missing critical windows for safe movement.
Thermal regulation is another factor often ignored in bug-out planning. Exposure to environmental conditions, whether heat or cold, places immediate stress on the body's ability to maintain core temperature. Hypothermia can occur in temperatures well above freezing when combined with wind and moisture, while heat exhaustion can escalate rapidly under direct sun and physical exertion. Clothing, shelter, and pacing become critical variables, yet many plans treat them as secondary concerns. The science is clear. Once core temperature deviates beyond safe thresholds, cognitive and physical performance degrade simultaneously, creating a feedback loop that accelerates risk.
As systems continue to fail, the environment itself becomes unpredictable. Urban areas may experience resource scarcity within days, while rural areas may lack infrastructure support entirely. The assumption that one environment is inherently safer than another ignores the complexity of resource distribution and population movement. Urban density increases competition, but rural isolation reduces access to medical care and supply chains. The correct approach is not to assume safety based on location, but to analyze resource availability, accessibility, and sustainability over time. This requires a level of planning that most individuals never undertake.
And as that window closes, the next layer of failure emerges, not in the environment, but in the plan itself, where overlooked details begin to surface under pressure, exposing weaknesses that were invisible in preparation but undeniable in execution.
The escalation phase begins when initial plans encounter friction, routes become blocked, supplies run low, and environmental conditions shift. This is where adaptability determines survival. However, adaptability is not improvisation. It is the execution of pre-established contingencies. Without layered planning, each obstacle forces a reactive decision, increasing stress and reducing efficiency. The compounding effect of small failures leads to system collapse at the individual level. What began as a controlled evacuation turns into a series of emergency responses, each more desperate than the last.